computer. All right, welcome everybody to our latest edition of Mentor Monday. I'm so excited to have you all here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Christina Joy Whittaker. I am a leadership strategist and coach, and I partner with professionals who are looking to shift to the next level. My goal with these particular Mentor Monday sessions is really to provide the space and the opportunity for you to get the agency that you need to define what that next level actually means for you. I know as ambitious professionals, we really rarely get the opportunity to evolve, especially as our priorities shift, especially as our interest shifts. And so I am definitely a testament of that. Someone who has embraced the evolution. I've lived multiple lives, from doing traditional careers to experiencing job loss to building as well in entrepreneurship. So I've seen both the peaks and the valleys, but right now what I do is partner with organizations and work with clients like McDonald's, the NBA, Lockheed Martin, and Target to secure 4 and 5, 6, even 7-figure contracts. So I'm so excited to have this conversation with you all today. If you did not get a chance to submit your question ahead of time, you can go ahead and put it in the chat. Or what you can do is also use the Q&A function at the bottom of this particular screen, and you can always put your Q&A there, and I'll be sure to circle back. But we got a great set of questions, so I'm so excited to have the opportunity to respond to them today. I know that you all have individual goals, that you all have individual visions, and a lot of times they expand or they just evolve over time. So I'm encouraged today, and I'm hopeful that everything that we talk about allows you to better align and find your path, especially one that aligns with your ultimate calling. So very excited to start today's Mentor Monday, and we are going to kick it off strong. The first question we have submitted is from Elise. Now, Elise says, I fear that I've turned my job from something that I used to love to something that I now hate. I know I'm excellent at the work that I do, but now it seems more of a burden than a blessing. I've worked for my organization for 14 years and I'm in a leadership role. So long story short, I feel like I've vested my time and energy. I don't want it to go to waste. Understandable. So it looks like your question is, how do you go from a space where you feel like you've created a particular role or you're working in a particular role and you're trying to find out, how do you actually fall back in love, or how do you find a job or a role that more aligns with something that's going to spark that joy? So I think this is a great question, and it's something that we often hear, because oftentimes, especially as ambitious professionals and even people with 14 years of work experience, 20 years of work experience, you find yourself spending more time working to achieve a story of success that was actually given to you. And rarely do we actually have the opportunity to reflect on what that success story really is supposed to mean to us. So it's something that we go up these ladders and we are hitting these milestones, we are hitting these markers, and sometimes we don't always have the ability to stop and say, is this actually what I want? Is this something that's actually going to bring me joy? Is this something that's going to allow me to have the impact that I really want to have? So thank you so much, for Elise, for submitting the question. I think it's incredibly valid. Something that I want to just encourage you and remind you of is, no matter what position that you're in, that the value that you bring, the expertise, your story, and your experiences, and how you're able to implement the way that you uniquely are able to do, all of that essentially builds your personal brand or your professional brand. And that, in essence, is completely portable. And so in the particular role that you have, I think there's a lot of different opportunities. However, sometimes when we get into that particular space, it almost feels like you're stuck in this cycle, as if you're paralyzed and you're not sure what to pick. And so I think what might be helpful for you as you're deciding to go forward is, first, understanding that you have the ability and the permission and the grace to evolve, right? Your priorities are allowed to shift. What you're looking for in a role is allowed to change. And what you're seeking in terms of your success and how you would like to pattern your life is allowed to evolve over time. And so one, just give yourself permission to go through that process, but also, as much as you can, take time to set priorities of what aligns with what you are looking to achieve right now. So in terms of your priorities, do you have financial financial goals? Do you have time freedom goals? Do you have goals of how you want to learn a different skill set? Are you looking for more exposure? Are you looking for opportunity? What do those priorities look like for you right now? If you were to look a year ahead of time and look back, what would you say allowed you to achieve or shift into something that really propelled you to go into that particular next level? So I would really, really challenge you and really invite you to set those priorities to see what does that mean for you right now in this particular season. The next thing I want you to do is really evaluate the 4 options that are actually available to you. So I don't want you to necessarily feel stuck, but know that you have 4 very distinct options. So 1, you can either seek a new role internally. 2, you can seek a new role externally. 3, you can work on what's needed to reinvent your current role. Or 4, you can really define what an exit strategy might look like for you. So instead of feeling like you're trapped or you're not exactly sure like what you want to do, I want to gift you those 4 options of saying like those are very concrete paths that you can choose to take. So once again, 1, you can look to seek a new role internally within your organization. 2, you can seek a new role externally, meaning in a different organization that either might be parallel to what you're looking for or might add something that's additional layer to better align you with your priorities. 3, you can reinvent in your current role. Or 4, you can determine, okay, I think I want to build an exit strategy. And from that point on, you can either exit completely and try entrepreneurship, or are you looking to take a sabbatical? Are you looking to just take some breathing time to figure out what that next step might be? And so in reference to your question, how do you fall back in love with your particular role? Sometimes we're in spaces where you don't necessarily need to fall back in love, but you more so need to prioritize where are those urgings or that semblance of significance really shifting you to. So to regurgitate what I just said, make sure you are very clear about what your priorities are right now for the moment, but also what your priorities are for the grander vision of your life. So for instance, if you do have an aspiration to get to a higher form of leadership, if you do have an aspiration to really investigate entrepreneurship, if you have an aspiration to speak, whatever that is, how do those priorities line up with what you want right now as in addition to where you are going? And also really take stake and understand that you're not stuck. You do have 4 concrete options. So it's either understanding what you need to prioritize internally. How do you seek a new role internally? How do you seek a new role externally? How do you reinvent in your current role? Or how do you make your exit? So I hope that's helpful in terms of giving you at least some options of what to consider as you're looking to figure out what is it that matters to you. That's something that's very, very internally driven, but it's also something that we don't always know, and it takes course over time. So even if it means notating the different types of projects that you like, the different types of questions you like to answer, and really seeing how does your current role align with that. And if there's a gap, if there's some divide that's happening, how do you effectively either fill that divide or position yourself in a role that allows that to be filled more adequately? So I hope that's helpful for you. I see a couple of more people joined in. I just want to reiterate, if you weren't able to submit your Q&A ahead of time, go ahead and use the Q&A function on this particular call, or you can go ahead and put it in the chat as well. I look forward to answering your questions. If you do have a piggyback question on top of somebody else's question, feel free to put that in the chat as well, and we'll be sure to get back to it. The next question is from Karen. Karen says, I've often wondered about how to blend my personal story and my job experience in a way that I can share with others. I often see my colleagues at similar levels being asked to speak or share their expertise. If I'm honest, I'm a bit jealous about that. It's frustrating because I don't understand how to break into the field. What should I do next? That's a great question, Karen. And I do see that as a very common common question that pops up, especially in the age of the way we are so driven on social media and we see other successes. So I know everyone has seen the 30 under 30 list, the 40 under 40 list, the 50 over 50 list. We have all of these mechanisms where we see people getting accolades or sharing their stories, being invited to panels or having speaking engagements or going to these particular conferences. And if you're not someone who was actively already in that particular capacity, it can be frustrating to understand, how is it that these people are getting these invitations? Why are you not selected? And a lot of times it gets into the cycle of comparing yourself or shame that really is unwarranted, because the secret is that the people that you are seeing just understand positioning to a certain extent. And so that's what I want to explain on this particular call. And so a lot of times what we end up doing is comparing ourselves, our ability, with those around us. And oftentimes we assume that they either have some secret inside track, they're somehow more qualified, or they're somehow more capable or worthy of these opportunities. But like I said, at the end of the day, it comes down to positioning. So I would say, if you are someone who does want to blend both your expertise as well as the sharing of your personal story, something that I would look at is developing a signature talk or a signature topic. What is that exactly? That basically means this is something, a topic or a talk that you either give on a regular basis, or a topic that you want to spread your expertise around. So I'm not exactly sure what your career field is, but let's say you're in HR and you're really passionate about retention, or let's say you're in entrepreneurship and you're really passionate about helping Black women excel. Whatever it is, pick that particular topic and then think about it as being the central focus of your expertise, and understanding that you need to start communicating about it from all sides of its relevancy. So what do people not know about that topic? What should they have known about that topic? How do you introduce new information about that particular topic? How do you talk about this or create platforms in a way for people to facilitate conversation around it? How do you become a thought leader and leading the discussion around what needs to be known about that particular topic? By doing that, both in the circles, in the arenas where people have these conversations, as well as online, that then sends an indicator that you are positioning yourself as an expert. But what I want you to do is that requires you to shift in mindset from waiting to be selected to instead proactively creating opportunities for you to share your expertise. A lot of times we get stagnant because we think these opportunities need to only organically come to us, and we need to wait for permission to actually talk about it. In reality, what's working in favor for probably the people that you're observing is that they're actively creating their opportunities. So they're either actively pitching their topics, they're actively talking about these topics, they're creating articles about it, they're volunteering their time, they're speaking about it to some capacity, they're developing programs around it. So they're able to now own a platform or own their thought leadership in a way that they can control the momentum of it. And at the end of the day, people respond to momentum. If they see that you are working and diligent and putting things out, then that creates an economy in some sense, where people now want to know how to transact with you, whether that's inviting you onto a panel, whether that's sharing your expertise, whether that's paying you to speak at a particular topic, whether that's paying you to consult as an expert. So what I would say is, don't wait to be selected or to be awarded a particular accolade. More so, shift to the mindset of really challenging yourself to think about, how do you actively create a platform for your own self? When we see these 40 under 40 lists, or we see these people getting accolades, they weren't necessarily always organically selected. I'm not sure if you are familiar even with how people get featured in publications. Most times they are pitching. They are actively pitching their own story. They are reaching out to the editors for these 40 by 40 lists, or these people who are, featured in these, I won't say which publications, but a lot of these publications, they're paying an admission fee. And so there's a lot of different ways for you to for you to really garner to garner credibility for your expertise, but know that more times than not, that's requiring you to shift into a creator mode. So don't wait for someone to necessarily select you. Think about what you have at your disposal right now. Are you active on LinkedIn? Do you talk about these topics on LinkedIn? Are you active in organizations? Do you go to conferences? Do you pitch your ideas or proposals to conferences? In your networks, do people actually know what you want to talk about? And so being really, really super clear about that is going to be super helpful. Oops, I think I did it again. I didn't open the chat to everyone. Sorry. It is now open. I saw Wanda, I'm sorry, you posted your comment, and you can go ahead, and I see it. I missed a few comments. So now the chat is open, but sorry about that. But this is something that I just want to challenge your thinking about, is how do you create your own platforms, and how do you use it in your favor? So understanding that there's a game behind it, to a sense, that doesn't mean you're not capable. That doesn't mean you're not credible. That doesn't mean you don't know the same or even more than some of these people who are being featured. What the difference is that they are actively pitching more than likely. They are actively pitching their stories. They're actively positioning themselves for these opportunities. And so think about ways, if I would say have a takeaway, think about ways for you to effectively and organically position yourself in a way that communicates to others that expertise, but also go after those opportunities as well. Now, there's obviously a strategy behind it. There's a strategy of how to develop your talking points. There's a strategy of how to package your talk in a way that is going to allow you to get paid opportunities. There's not always a need for your expertise. There's not always a need for your topic in every arena. So knowing which arenas that are actually going to allow you to leverage that collateral, both for your credibility as well as your income, is key. And so there's a strategy behind that. I do offer that in my masterclass, so feel free to ask me questions about that, but that's something that's really key. And I know this just went to me, but Wanda Martin says, that's how I was featured on NBC and ABC as Philly's finest in goal setting. I pitched the TV stations and the other producers. Exactly. So she knew how to pitch it. She learned in my masterclass and was taught to package her talks in person and on paper. So I think you can now talk to everyone. Sorry, I had the chat closed, but yes, knowing how to position yourself and knowing that a lot of times things come from that proactive pitch process. Then you had a follow-up question about how do you determine your actual pricing? Would someone actually pay me to speak? Short answer, yes, someone will pay you to speak. Now, how you determine your pricing, this is what I'll say about that. There's definitely a strategy to pricing. Some people will always speak for free. I don't necessarily advocate for that pricing. I advocate for my clients to at least be negotiating 4, 5, or 6-figure agreements in terms of speaking. And speaking in general is a strategy because it allows you to get in front of a lot of people in a very consolidated amount of time. However, it goes beyond you just having, for instance, a 1-hour engagement. Knowing how to leverage that particular platform in a way that you can either pitch a program that's going to produce additional income, or that's going to allow you to do greater business with the organization that you're speaking in front of, to leverage that in a way that's going to create more income for you, takes a lot of intentionality. So sometimes you'll see people speaking on every single platform, right? And they're not necessarily making money. They're not necessarily making a dime. I more so emphasize and work with people who want to get paid for their particular talks. And so if you're asking about that, then knowing what an hourly talk would charge, knowing what a half-day workshop might charge, knowing what a full-day workshop might charge, you have to define those particular rates. The biggest mistake that people run into is really lowballing themselves. I've been in a lot of situations where I've been talking to organizations and someone who came in at a lower rate was looked over and they paid my particular higher rate because I was able to, did I not open it? I'm sorry. I thought I did. Oh, sorry. Now it's open to everyone. I thought I did it. I think I slipped on opening the chat again. Now it's open. Sorry about that. But sorry, what was I saying? Oh, there have been opportunities when other people have been in conversation to work with an organization, and they've been overlooked, because a lot of times what pricing is, it's a communicator. It's a communicator of your value. So if you don't necessarily know what number to come in, a lot of times, even if it's, especially if it's low, organizations of a greater magnitude won't necessarily trust your word. However, if you also don't have confidence in your ability to sell something that's high ticket or high end, then you also aren't going to be able to sell it. So it takes a lot of confidence to, one, be prepared with your speaking points, two, know whatever you're talking about is going to be salient and relevant to the audience that's going in, and three, knowing how to have value indicators that's going to indicate to someone else, okay, I am willing to invest X amount of dollars into this person to come in and talk to my organization, because I know the dividends and the power that's going to come behind it. And so I do teach this in depth in my particular masterclass, but I think pricing is a really great question. And I think it's great that you're thinking about it, because a lot of times people feel as if they have to start from nothing. And that's not necessarily the case. While there is a strategy to speaking for free, if you stay in that realm, then you can easily get stuck. And so having the end in mind and knowing how you want to grow a partnership or grow an engagement is going to inform how you're able to price. And so it's hard for me to just tell you, oh, charge this amount, because it does depend on the topic. It does depend on who you're talking to. I don't necessarily charge the same as I do executives as I would maybe somebody who might be entry level. So there is a strategy to it, but if you have really in-depth questions, I do cover that in my masterclass. But I think it's great that you are thinking about the pricing element, because that's going to be a great communicator for how people do business with you and how you communicate your value. Now, I will say, once again, for anyone who's just joining, if you do have piggyback questions, you can ask them in the chat. If you do have piggyback questions, you can also ask them in the Q&A. If you have new questions, you can also ask them in the Q&A as well, and I'll be sure to circle back to that. So great question about how to determine pricing and would someone really pay you to speak. Let me go back to that as well. Definitely someone will pay you to speak. There is a very large economy for speaking. However, it determines where you want to speak. Some people really want to speak in the corporate sector. Some people want to speak in the nonprofit sector. Some people want to speak at universities. Some people want to speak in the faith sector. So it's really dependent on where your industry is going to be most beneficial to you, and knowing the cadence of that particular industry and how they make those particular decisions. But great question. Next, I have Laura. Laura says, I'm in a situation where I feel overworked and overlooked in my role, but I'm ready to get promoted. I see other people celebrate it for less work, and I don't understand why. How do I shift from this position? So being in that state of being overworked and overlooked is what I assume you are talking about. All right, Laura, I think that's an amazing question. And it sounds like you're someone who really is intent on advancing within their organization. And you've made the most important decision, meaning that internally you have decided that you want to advance. A lot of times what happens is, as professionals, we assume that people are going to just know that we want to advance, or that that's a natural inclination. But a lot of times, people don't think about us as much as we think we are. So I'm glad that you have internally already decided that you are ready to advance. That's step one. So awesome job. Step two, I want you to get super clear on whatever role that you're looking to really achieve. Get super clear on what are those benchmarks. What is it that they are actually looking for in that role? And I don't mean that just in the general sense. So obviously anyone can tell you, okay, look at the job descriptions, look at the roles, and basically do that work now. I think it's a little bit deeper than that. There's something that I think often we miss, and that's that busyness does not necessarily equate to progress, right? And it does not necessarily equate to advancing. So I want you to get super clear on those benchmarks, but moreover, I want you to deeply understand that it's not about doing work. It's about doing work that actually matters. And more specifically, that matters to the people making decision. to to the people making the decision. I can't emphasize enough how many times that I've run into, especially women professionals who are doing so much, right? Like you're putting in the hours, you're putting in the integrity of your work, you're delivering, you're producing. But a lot of times those deliverables aren't necessarily tied to the priorities of people making decisions or the business objectives of the organization. So what I want you to do is, as much as you can, write down what you're doing. And I want you to be able to tell a clear story between how that relates to the people making the promotion decisions or how that relates to the actual business objectives of the organization. Anything that does not fall in line with having a clear, direct connection to those priorities, I want you to see how can you offload that from your list, because those are things that aren't necessarily earning you the points or giving you the leverage that you think it is. And a lot of times it can be a hindrance because it's removing your time freedom and your ability to really position yourself in a way that's going to allow you to advance, because you're busy doing something else that you might think is important, but at the end of the day is not. So get super clear on those particular benchmarks moving forward, so you can understand how to align your efforts, because your time is valuable and I don't want it spent producing deliverables or doing work that's not actually going to move you closer to your goal if it's to get promoted. So after you get super clear on those particular benchmarks, then I want you to get very clear on what's the narrative that you want to build. When I talk about your narrative, I'm talking about your personal brand or your professional brand. What is it about your expertise that needs to be elevated and amplified and communicated on a regular level that creates a story about why you are integral, not only to the work that's being done right now within your role, but the work that you actually want to do? How are you building a story around how not only have you mastered where you're at, but you are the natural only choice for where you want to go? Building that narrative allows you to get super clear on the skills that are going to be most relevant to where you're going, but it's also going to give you speaking points about how to communicate it to those making the decision about you. More times than not, we assume because of our great work that people are going to know what we're good at. And that is just not the case. So after you get very clear on what that narrative is, I want you to create a cadence in which you're communicating different parts of that narrative. That doesn't mean you need to be obnoxious and bragging about yourself on a regular basis or all the time, but to a certain extent, you need to amplify what you are good at and the successes that you've won. So I always say, especially if you're in the traditional 9-to-5 sense, create a folder or create something called like a brag bank where you are saving accolades said about you. So maybe someone sent an email and was like, hey, thanks for this. This was really great. We really needed this. Maybe a client called in and was just singing your praises. Maybe there was a big project that you had an integral role in, and it got great remarks. Save all of that. Save absolutely everything that's an elevator to praise you, so that one, it's ready around performance time, but also seed those great things that you've done into conversations, into regular emails. So if you're working on a particular project, take credit for the work that you've done. So don't just go, great job, team. I would say something that really relates to you and saying like, I'm so glad I was able to work on the analysis of this project. It looks like it was, greatly received. Thank you everyone for your efforts. We did it. Like, you can sum it up at the end, but make sure you are amplifying the actual work that you have done. And that allows for other people to see very clearly your skill and your expertise. But also, after you have communicated that narrative, after you're communicating your personal and professional brand and everything, be very clear about the people making the decisions that you want to get promoted. Be very clear about the role that you want. Don't just assume they know. If you're a director and you want to be a senior director, have a conversation and say, like, my goal is to be senior director within the next 6 months. What do I need to do to get there? How does success look like for you in terms of assessing for this particular role? And how do I best fill that particular gap? People make decisions when you're able to solve a problem to some extent. And so if you are constantly putting yourself as the solution to that particular problem, then you are naturally going to position yourself for that role. Now, I say all that to say, sometimes we do all of those things and it still doesn't work out, right? But I would say after you've done everything in your capacity, and if it doesn't work in your favor, then you have a decision to make, right? Sometimes we're in organizations that will chronically overlook you or will always hire externally. Like, that's just a matter of fact. Maybe there's some prejudices in there. Maybe there's other factors that's actually blocking your progress. Then you have a decision to make. And I would go back to, whose question was it? I would go back to Elise's question and giving you those 4 options as well. Are you, 1, planning your exit? Are you 2, looking to see what you can do to reinvent your current role if you're dead set on staying? Are you looking for external roles that allow you to have that leverage that you want to have ahead of time? Or are you looking to seek a whole brand new role still internally if you desire to stay? But that particular decision is yours. It also comes down to relatability more than anything. How are you positioning yourself at the crossroads of what is needed by the people making decisions and your particular expertise? That's kind of the divot we want to sit in. That's the place where we really want to amplify. So be sure that you are positioning yourself in a way that allows you to tell that narrative, that allows you to align that narrative with the benchmarks and the priorities of the people making the decision. But also, when all is said and done, understand you still have that power. You still have the power to determine, do I want to continue on or not? And so don't cede that just because someone fails to see your value, because even if they do fail, somebody else will see it. Somebody else needs that particular expertise. So I don't want you to feel beholden or as if you're stuck just because someone has made a decision about you that you don't agree with. You still have the opportunity to pivot and make that adjustment as necessary. I hope that was a long answer, but I hope that was helpful. I get that question a lot, so I wanted to try to be as thorough as possible, but I don't want you to forget your own agency in that particular role, and don't feel as if you have to just wait. If you want the role, say you want the role, be very clear about it. And if people are intimidated by it, so be it. But at least you've done what you need to do to be very clear about your expectations and about what you are looking to get out of a particular role. I hope that was helpful. If you have an additional question, or if you have any piggybacks, or if anybody else does have a piggyback to that, go ahead and ask it in the Q&A or the chat. If you have new questions, you can still have time to ask it in the Q&A. We do have a few questions left that I want to get to, but I also want to make sure that I'm super clear. So I hope that was helpful, Laura. Next question is from Ryan. Ryan says, can you talk about working in the faith sector with churches? I've spoken and worked in churches mostly because my spouse and I are in ministry, but I've also had jobs as a marketing professional in my career. I want to expand my reach to other industries, but will I be accepted? I don't know if you know me, Ryan. Do you know me? So I'll be careful about what I say. Ryan, I definitely have a heart for people in the faith sector. I am the daughter of a preacher. My dad was a pastor and my mom was a teacher. So definitely familiar with that particular industry. And here's what I'll say about that. I think people who are in ministry, as well as those who oftentimes are in education, fall in a very unique bucket where much of what you do is formed by the opinions of other people. What I mean by that is, because of your very public role in helping people or pouring into people or being very heart-centered in the work that you are doing, others are open to having very strong opinions about what you should do, how you should do it, and what you should not do. And that is not always accurate to what you actually are able to do. And so in reference to your question, about working in the faith sector. You said you want to reach out, you want to be in other sectors. Understanding that just because you're in ministry, or just because, I'll include education as well, because I think this is rampant there as well. Just because you're in these particular industries does not mean you need to lowball, does not necessarily mean you need to do things for free. You have a skill set that does have a value to it, and you are fully entitled and you are fully able to charge the full value of that. And so it looks like, Ryan, you're asking, will I be accepted? Will I be able to speak in other arenas? And the short answer to that is absolutely yes. What you talk about in your faith arenas does not cut off just because you're in a different building than a church. If you think about it biblically, right? Like things in the Bible produce fruit, or biblical principles, as you believe, produce fruit, right? And so those are the same principles that others use in business. The principle of reciprocity, the principle of sowing and reaping, it's just investing. The principle of exhortation is just encouraging, right? Like it's just different language, but it's actually the same principles that translates to other industries. And so what happens a lot of times is we get so caught up in that vernacular that we don't understand how it actually goes into other arenas, but it definitely does. When we talk about reaping, what you sow, you shall reap. That's talking about profit. What you invest, what goes into what you actually profit, what you invest and put your time and attention has a direct outcome. It's the same principle, different language. And so I don't want you to get caught up in feeling as if you aren't doing something that's not already applicable, or like you need to get all these new skills or get all of this new information, because it actually does translate, and it translates quite nicely. It's just a matter of knowing how to use that language in a way that's going to resonate with your audience. And so you weren't necessarily specific with saying what industries that you want to work in. However, if my default is typically corporate, so I'll speak in terms of translation to that. If I'm talking about leadership development to a group of people, right? And, taking your ministry expertise, I'm sure you've seen in your individual church what it takes to motivate people, what it takes to encourage people, what it takes people to get to one goal to the next. That's the same in the corporate sector. What do they need to get to be their best version of themselves on their business teams? What does it take to profit within the organization? What does it take to move people from one goal to the next? It's the same problem, just different audience, right? And so I don't want you to psych yourself out and feel like you don't have the skill set, because the skill is there. It's just probably in your language of it. And so once again, packaging a signature talk or a topic that is relevant to the industry that you want to break into is going to be key. So how you talk about it in that arena is what's going to be most helpful. And also understand that you don't need to, just because it's helping people doesn't mean that doesn't mean that you can't charge for it. So I wish I had more time to really unpack this the way I want to, because I think there's a lot of mental gymnastics that both ministers and educators have to go through to relearn what it means to position yourself and not feel condemned for it. But there is nothing wrong with talking about your skill set and amplifying it and saying that you're doing this for profit. Jesus didn't say be broke. That's not in the Bible. It's not, that's just nowhere there, right? And so I want you to dispel the myth that you don't belong because of your expertise, or that your expertise can't translate, because it really does. And it actually, quite frankly, is really needed. Those same principles are in such demand in the corporate sector. And so don't get stuck or caught up just because you don't feel like you have the perfect language, or you're not exactly sure of the perfect wording. Like, it's okay. It's okay if you don't know it now. It's just, I would almost challenge you to think of it's just translating. It's translating the same principles into just a different arena. And, I'm not sure if you're actually on this call, but I hope that makes sense. If anyone else does have questions about that, I'll be sure to go a little bit more in depth. But what I can say more times than not about it is don't get stuck in your head and feeling like just because you're from a faith-based background that you don't have place in under other industries. I will also say within your actual industry, within the church sector, it's a crapshoot, right? Like sometimes people will always expect you to do things for free. That doesn't mean you need to agree to it, right? Like, especially if it's outside of what you have agreed to in your role. There's one thing, and I'm not sure what capacity you're in ministry, but there's one thing about fulfilling the requirements of your role. But when people are asking you to do things outside of that, then the choice is yours. The choice is absolutely yours. And I would not feel stuck or beholden to agreeing to a narrative or agreeing to a pattern of behavior just because other people want you to kind of fall in line in that particular place. So I hope that's helpful. I think that's a great question. I think it's a super valid question, and it's something, and I definitely commend your bravery, because it's something that people don't always bring up, especially from those particular sectors. And so I think it's important. I would also say about your expertise before I get off this topic, just because you're talking about something that doesn't forward lead with speaking about God or Christianity or something faith-based in nature, doesn't mean that your message can't be God-drenched. Here's what I'll say about that. Like, I am myself a believer, right? But every single time I go into like a leadership development session, or every time I'm speaking to executives, that's encouraging. That's my ministry. That is me pouring into them in a way that's going to uplift them or elevate them or allow them to see a new version of themselves that they have not yet seen. I pray before everything I do, and personally in my particular business, right? And I pray that they see God through me, however they see it. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm quoting scriptures. However, the principles or the tenets of that particular, of what I believe, a lot of times is very evident in what I share, right? And so it doesn't mean you have to be a different person or be less of who you are. It's just a matter of, in ministry, this, how do you effectively talk to the person in front of you? So the way that you talk to someone who's seasoned in your faith, right, may not be the same way that you talk to someone who's new in your faith. It's same outside, right? The way that you talk to them about what you're speaking about just may need some deviation, right? That doesn't mean you lose the message. That doesn't mean you lose the purpose. That just means you're translating it and you're tailoring it in a way that the person is going to hear, in a way that they're going to understand and interpret and get to a point of action. So I hope that's helpful for you. Oh, yes. Thank you, Wanda. You're always so, thank you for commenting. Yes. She's saying that she's a pastor as well and used to struggle with this. But you're not asking any longer, right? Because it was a hurdle that you were able to overcome. And that's a real concern. And so thank you, Ryan, really for bringing that up, because that definitely is a real concern. And it's not something that a lot of people know how to speak on. But I'm glad that you were able to ask that question. I don't necessarily see your name, so you might be watching the replay. But if anyone else does have questions about that, I'll elaborate. But I will go to our next question that's on deck. We are winding down to the last two. And I know we have about 13 minutes left together, so I want to make sure I get to these as well. Maria is asking, oh wait, did I skip one? No. Here we go. Maria is asking, I know that last week you talked about TED Talks, but can we circle back to that topic? Yes, we can. How do you figure out what exactly to talk about? Okay. How do you figure out what exactly to talk about? That's your question. Great question, Maria. If you recall, or if you watched my replay from last week, there are two questions for anyone who's looking to leverage. I want to use the language like leveraging the TED platform, right? Because everyone has a goal, or not everyone. A lot of people have goals to do TED Talks or to do public talks of some nature. What I want us to do is elevate our thinking and really considering how do you want to leverage that particular platform for you? How do you best leverage that for you? And so the two questions I talked about last week of really wanting you to reflect on is, one, deciding what do you want to talk about, and two, deciding where do you want it to take you, right? So every TED application that you ever get, every one that you're going to look at, no matter what venue, no matter how big or small, one of the questions that you're going to have to answer is, what is your big idea? Basically, what they are asking you is, what do you actually want to talk about? This is where people get hemmed up, because they want to do the actual talk. They want to be on the stage, but it can be a little bit difficult in figuring out what is it that you want to talk about. And so I do understand the nature of your question, and I think it's valid, right? So I will circle back and talk about that particular aspect a little bit more. So in reference to figuring out your big idea, I think there's two strategies, right? There's the strategy of wanting to talk about a topic that you deeply care about. It's maybe something that you've observed in your own life, or maybe something that you have deep expertise on, or that you've researched, or just the thought that you're formulating in your head, but somehow it relates to you, right? There's that one strategy. The second strategy is talking or picking a topic about a place or a thing that you'd like to talk about in the future, or a place that you'd like to eventually position or transition you to. So one kind of allows you to leverage what you already know, what you've already seen, and what you're already doing. The other is more so a bridge to get you to do what you want to do or what you want to talk about. And it's kind of like your entry into the particular arena. There's no wrong way. There's no wrong path that you can choose. But I would say, and as you're narrowing down what it is that you want to talk about, understand that those two paths are what you're going to need to consider. And so depending on what path you choose, then you kind of get to the same set of questions. After you figure out, is this going to be a something I already know, or is this going to be kind of my entry into something else? The next questions, and I did write these down, the next questions I want you to think about in reference to what you want to talk about, the actual idea that you want to talk about, is what allows you to either challenge a currently wide held belief. So like, are you being contrarian? Are you introducing a new element to it? But regardless, like, what allows you to challenge the understanding of a current widely held belief? 2, what allows you to deepen the understanding of a current belief? So maybe you're not necessarily challenging the narrative, but you're adding an additional layer, or you're presenting something new about it, or you're putting a little twist about it. Like, what allows you to deepen that particular understanding? Or what introduces a new topic just altogether, right? Like, what's something revolutionary that you feel like people, or maybe I feel like revolutionary is a bit much, because it doesn't need to actually be super revolutionary, but what's something that introduces something new to the audience? Now, you can Google this, right? And everyone will ask questions around this nature. They'll say things that are similar to what I just said. But in terms of actually getting booked for a talk, or not booked, that's not the correct terminology, but having your application accepted for an actual TED Talk, it comes down to relevance and relatability. So how is it relevant to the people who they're speaking to? Because each TED event is unique. That's what makes this topic a little bit harder to sometimes teach on, because there's so many different formats of TED Talks, and there's so many different target audience of TED Talks. So you have to know how whatever it is that you want to bring to the surface relates to the actual talk that you're applying to, but also, how are you related to it? Why are you the natural voice? Why are you the best person to deliver this particular message? This is another area where a lot of times people get tripped up, because we get in our head saying, well, there are hundreds of other people who talk about this topic, or I'm not the first, or I'm not adding something new, or whatever. And most times you probably work yourself out of the arrangement faster than we give ourselves permission to kind of sit in it. And so understanding that those are as you're thinking about a topic, those are kind of the markers that you want to look for, because that's what's going to add interest to your application. When we think about the application process, every TED Talk probably gets hundreds, right, of applications for each individual event. And so what your job is to do, or what your main job is to position yourself so you stick out of the bunch. If someone's just quickly reviewing what you have to say, what's going to allow you to really get picked out of that narrative? Something else, and this is so simple, Maria. Something else that people forget to do is they literally just forget to answer all of the questions on the application. And the reason why I say that is because not every single TED event, but a lot of TED events require a video of some component, right? So a lot of times you might write out all of this great stuff, right? But they might only judge you on the video. And so be sure that you're giving yourself time so you don't necessarily feel rushed to do it. I did not necessarily do that, but don't do what I did. Essentially, like be sure to give yourself time to really look through the questions, to think through them, and as much as possible, be incredibly clear about how you're positioning yourself in the grand scheme of the topic. And the reason why I say that, to say, at a particular event, there might be other people on the docket that are talking or applying to talk about very similar things to you. And so an event curator is going to have certain topics that they want to talk about. Let's say on a particular docket, they want to talk about innovation, curiosity, and change, or something like that. So even if you have the best idea in the world, if that particular event curator doesn't want to talk about that topic, then they're not going to accept your application. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea. That doesn't mean you did bad on your application. That just means it didn't fit that particular event. So I don't want you to get discouraged if you have put in applications and it's gotten rejected, or you're not exactly sure where you're going, where you're going wrong. I'm not saying you have a good application. I'm not seeing it, right? However, there are some other factors that might cause someone to, give pause, or to kind of put your application to the side. So as much as you can control, that's why I'm saying be sure that you're positioning yourself as the natural expert so that it can stick out amongst other people, but also really consider, in terms of as you're whittling down what to talk about, how are you challenging those big ideas? How are you deepening understanding? How are you introducing new topics? And that's what's going to allow you to really excel in the application process. I do talk about that in depth in my masterclass. I know I've talked to some of you already who are interested, but if you do have additional questions, we do go through I share, all of the application questions, how to really talk about yourself through it, how to talk about your topic through it, and really what's needed to kind of position yourself to that. But all in all, there's still that aspect of just knowing the game and knowing the strategy of TED Talks. So I don't want you to get discouraged in the process, especially, I don't know if you've tried before and, you've not necessarily been successful, but just keeping that in mind. And now we are coming to our final question, almost right on the dot. Thank you all for spending this hour with me. I did say at the beginning, or I'm not sure if I said at the beginning, but we will for next month move to a bi-monthly format as opposed to doing these sessions weekly. So we are going to finish out August doing it weekly, but in September and for the remainder of the time, we're going to switch to bi-monthly. So just meeting 2 times a month. So you'll have a chance to ask your questions still. I'm not necessarily going to cut off this series, but we are going to meet a little less often. But if you do still have questions today, and of course next week, you can submit them either on the online form or through the Q&A function. But as we're getting to our last question, Donna is asking, I am a 25-year professional, but I know I need support to figure out how to really make an impact in. Let me read this first. Okay. I'm a 25-year professional, but I know I need support to figure out how to really make the impact that I want. I see. I really don't know where to start or really what to ask. I feel a bit lost, but how do you determine whether a group or a one-on-one or what programs might work best for you? I'm kind of new to this and trying to figure, and I'm still trying to figure things out. I think this is a great question. This is a really great question because a lot of times we get tripped up and we're trying to figure out, okay, everyone seems like they have the answer to my problem, right? Like you have identified that you have a problem, but you've also identified, okay, I'm going to need support going forward. How do you actually decide? And you're saying it specifically as someone who's still trying to figure out what that next step looks like for them. And so what I will say before I jump into like the logistics of anything is understanding that most times, especially as you're shifting into calling, and I know I've talked about this before, is that a lot of times clarity comes after you make your decision, right? So you might not necessarily know all the pieces that come together. You might not necessarily know exactly what you want to do or how you want it to look, but understanding that I don't want you to hem up your decision or stall in making any type of a decision if you already know that you want to move forward, because a lot of times that's going to, the nature or the vehicle of how you do that is going to come later. But here's what I will say in reference to your specific question about, should I do a group? Should I do one-on-one? That is definitely a decision that's up to you. But I'll layer it in saying you have to understand the type of professional you are, and you have to understand where you're at in your career. There are some people who I work with, some of my clients, I have a contingent of clients who only want to do one-on-ones. That is legit. Like they want to be able to ask their questions and they want to be able to go about their business. They don't necessarily want the group environment. And that's completely understandable. And what I want you to really think about is what type of coaching would you need, and who gets you to an actual point of action? Who allows you to have that clarity and that clarity of mind, or allows you to really see a different version of yourself or a vision a lot more clearly, because it's kind of jumbled in your own brain. Not everybody is able to do that. And one person who's successful with one particular contingent doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be successful elsewhere, right? And so I want you to be super clear about knowing the type of person you are. Are you someone who thrives in having one-on-one sessions, or do you want a group? Sometimes when you're looking at coaching programs in a group manner, people allow it to be group led, meaning like it's kind of group think and they're not necessarily there. I see you. Thanks for anyone who has to jump. I know some of you are really time constrained, so go ahead and jump. But if you do have further questions about this, we will be sending the replay. So I look forward to touching base with you all soon. But I know sometimes some of you are more so individually motivated and you more so need that direct connection and that direct feedback from a coach who's going to be uniquely in tune to their needs. So for those people, and especially those people who want to do it in a very collapsed amount of time, I would really recommend you doing one-on-one and investigating what are those one-on-one options. There's some of the people who I work with who, we've done branding weekends where, they want to get all of the results, but they want to get it in a very segmented amount of time. So we're able to set up their photo shoot. We're able to get their brand strategy. We're able to get their website all done in one weekend. That allows them to just basically take off running. Other people more so thrive in environments and they want that group participation. They want that shared conversation and they want that dynamic. And so if you are that type of person who really wants to go towards a goal and community and who wants to get the feedback from other people, who wants to hear a collective kind of conversation, then that would be great for you, right? And so understanding which type of person you are, but more so what's going to get you to a point of action, what's going to allow you to have that accountability that's needed. So I hope that was helpful to your question, Donna. I know we are right on time, just about 2 minutes over. So I thank you everyone for your great participation today. I thank you so much for sticking with me. I look forward to our next Mentor Monday session. If you do have additional questions, you can use the form that's linked below. Make sure you're on the mailing list and you'll be sure to get this replay. If there are no further questions, I look forward to talking to you all soon. Have a great day. Have a great Monday.